Voices of a Century is something that definitely preserves history and also continues to communicate what those who came before us did and have paved the way. And somebody who definitely is invested in sharing those stories is Nyla Singh, freelance photographer who joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Listen, and I think this particular project, Voices of a Century, is so incredible. And I'm really excited to get in depth into what you've covered, who you've spoken to. But before we get to that, what inspired you to do Voices of a Century?
So I'm a freelance photographer, and I always had a passion for the aging process and the history of Trinidad. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, in particular my grandmother, listening to her stories of the old time days and the way that life was back then, and was always intrigued because we don't have that now. And when she passed in 2010, I found myself missing those moments with her. So I started going around the neighborhood and asking for the oldest people living there, anybody who in their 70s, 80s, 90s. I decided that I would just go and say, I want to take a portrait, and use my camera as a key into their lives. But really and truly, it was more beneficial to me, I think, because I was so happy to be in their company. And I would hear about their history, and sometimes we would speak for hours. They were so happy to tell me about the old time days. And I'll speak to them for hours before I actually raise my camera to take their portrait. And it was in 2014 when I was working on a project with Dr. Sharda Patesa, on the history of the Ganesh Utsav festival, which was celebrating 100 years that particular year, that we met our first centenarian, Mr. Ori. Oh my gosh, I was like so excited to meet this man. I mean, thinking that he has walked this earth for 100 years, you know? And even though he wasn't able to give us a proper interview, he was able to tell us that for many years he was the sole person to carry that murti for the Ganesh Utsav festival. On the last night, he would take the murti on his shoulder down to the river where they would do the submersion, also known as the Visarjan. And it was amazing, you know, to be in the company of such a person, you know.
So this sounds incredible. Now, I wanted to go into some of the interviews, but I feel like you've had so many memorable interviews. Is there anything in particular, aside from that sticks out to you?
There's so many. Everyone was so unique in their own way, you know. I mean, there was Mr. Charu, who, up until a couple months before he passed, he was still teaching Sanskrit in a temple. It was amazing.
Yeah.
There is Dharmi Deo, who is still alive, who is 110 years old. She recently celebrated her birthday.
110?
110 years old. She got married at the age of 9.
Oh my goodness.
And slept with her mother-in-law until she reached that pubic stage. And then and she has now outlived all of her children except one. And she lived a I mean, they all have such interesting stories. There was Jahajan, who was the last surviving indentured laborer. She was actually born on one of the boats from India to Trinidad. Her dad was a chef on the boat, and he passed. And they threw his body overboard. And on arrival to Trinidad, they didn't want to let her in because the mother, her mom and her, they wouldn't because the men were considered the more fitting for, you know, work and that kind of thing. They wanted to send her back to India. However, a man on the port saw her and said, I would take care of her. And so they stayed. And as she grew, she was responsible for toting these buckets of water on her head and climbing up the Usain towers and the cooling towers and throwing them off. And one day she slipped and fell and she broke her hip. And then she was not able to work anymore. But she became very creative in how she raised her children and stuff.
Definitely a theme of resilience.
Oh, definitely.
And one can only imagine how these stories have impacted the lives of their family members, but also must have impacted you as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, there are so many lessons to be learned. They have so many tidbits of advice that they can give to you about life, and a couple, stand out to me. One, being that their devotion to God. The first thing that they do on awaking in the morning is to worship their God, and also too, they all ate very little and hardly any meat. And lastly, well, of course, I have so many more, but the ones that stand out would be the fact that they had a sense of community around them, whether it be family, friends, or their neighbors. They always had people coming and going,
Yeah, this is interesting. I feel like we're getting some life tips here as well. How to live to be 100. Absolutely incredible. Just to imagine 110 years old, the stories. And I mean, you've just given us a taste of some of the stories you've experienced. And tell us something. I mean, this is so impactful and so monumental, and I think transformational as well for many of the younger generation who've never been able to access this sort of information. What is next for Voices of the Century?
Well, the documentary was just really a taste of what I hope to have done with the project. I mean, you can't really put... So the documentary had 5 of these individuals that we interviewed. There's no way in 26 minutes that we could really capture, their entire stories. So what I really would like to do is to have series or a film, because I have all this information on these hard drives sitting for so many years, but I need to find the competent people to really make something of it.
Understood.
Because I think it's so important.
It is very important.
And we've lost most of them. And the one survivor, Jeremy Dale, who's 110, she's in advanced stages of Alzheimer's now. So,
wow. Yeah. Well, you're definitely doing a great civic duty.
Thank you.
I must say. Where can we access this documentary?
So it's actually on YouTube. I uploaded. There are 2 parts on YouTube currently.
All right, so Voices of a Century by Nyla Singh, that's what we can look for.
Yes.
Now, also, of course, it's noted that this has not gone miss, and you are going to be, let's say, honored tomorrow. You're receiving an award from the Desh Committee.
Yes.
If I pronounced it correctly.
Yes.
Congratulations on that. How does that feel?
Oh, great. I mean, I've been working on this project for a while. Of course, due to COVID, I had to put a little full stop there, or comma, I should say, because they're a sensitive group. And now I hope to continue with the interviews.
Definitely. I mean, we hope you continue with the interviews as well, and we want to have you back so that we can learn so much more. I need to know, though, Nyla, how long did this project take?
Well, to get to the point of the final documentary was about 5 years from the interviews to the documentary. Because we had a lot of political things happening.
Understood. And one can imagine as well that, you can get lost in conversation, because when you sit there and you hear these stories, as you mentioned earlier, you're there, you're having a conversation, and you just realize maybe 20 minutes, an hour later, and now I should take a picture.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely beautiful. Nyla, would you like to share a message with Trinidad and Tobago on Indian Arrival Day?
Sure. Happy Indian Arrival Day to everyone. I hope that you all enjoy your holiday and remember where we have come from, where we are, and where we are going. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for being with us this morning, Nyla. Looking forward to seeing Voices of the Century and seeing more from you.
Thanks so much.
Nyla Singh, freelance photographer, here with us this morning, speaking about Voices of a Century. You can check it out on YouTube and learn so much about our rich history and culture. Stay tuned. We are continuing to celebrate Indian Arrival Day on the Now Morning Show right after this break.
Traditional Indian dance forms like Bharatanatyam and Kathak thrive in Trinidad and Tobago, celebrated for their graceful movements and storytelling, kept alive through dance academies and cultural organizations across the nation.